Greetings, listeners. This is your resident Magus, Ari, and I'm here to create a substitute podcast, or at least a discussion, because we had technical difficulties on the last one, the one that is not published, and we may recover it, and if we do, I'll clean it up and put it up there, or maybe we'll just move on. But I do want to fill the gap and take the opportunity to explain some things about our discussions, what we do, what our viewpoint is, and this should all be explained in the podcast. But there, I want to go into Jay's process. I want to give the listener, and since Jay agrees, and it was almost his idea, give the listener a perspective of what occultists do, and that's a general term or a very fantasy term. I'm not an occultist, but I do engage in esoteric practices, mostly contemplative. I don't do ritual, but sometimes you want to do something spontaneous. Sometimes you want to connect or bring something into being. Whatever the reason. And spontaneously, you go through a series of symbolic motions that all express your purpose. And sometimes you think it out, plan it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you realize, oh, I forgot, it's the solstice, let's do something. It's a language. And the language conveys both your will and desire, but it also conveys your sentiments to the unseen. You can either have it also from the celestial level to the underworld. So all of these things are essentially coming together in a synthesis. And I want to take the opportunity to express some ideas here. All of this is unscripted. I write, but I don't do scripts very well because some inspiration comes and I always end up going off of them. Now, Jay, as we said before, I met him around 2006 online. We've never met in person. And over time, he and a few other people were letting me try my creative adaptations on them. But after I vetoed them, of course, and did them myself. There was a period when things were very hostile with the Lesser Key of Solomon, and I avoided it. And I went back to it gradually, and then I found out that the Esoteric Archives sigils were different than the sigils in the established version, and that Aleister Crowley had a input with this, and maybe Mathers as well. The Golden Dawn founder. My point is that it was chaotic, and then I brought it into a zone where people could actually use it. And it brought up things, and that helped me from that perspective to validate certain of my own perceptions. You don't want to be in your own little bubble in esoteric matters. However, you don't want to be carried away with the crowd. Sometimes you have to go outside a box that you don't see that others are willing to go outside. And then others may follow. Sometimes it's the wrong box. Sometimes, you lead others astray. So that's a responsibility. And I'm very well aware of it. Me and many people, if you start young, you start getting intuitive openings fairly early. Let's say you're practicing a decade since your teens, you're 25. And maybe 30, you start getting ideas and saying, okay, I'm ready to share this, or I'm ready to apply this and make it work for me. Usually you're jumping the gun. Unfortunately, waiting till 60 again isn't an option for most. But if you do undertake it, you have to be very, very careful, and maybe too careful, because there are potential revelations that may need to come later that will put a twist on the whole situation. You may end up misleading people, yourself. You may end up basically marketing something that may get you a good paycheck, but it may have consequences down the line. So it is a responsibility, as does disseminating any information is a responsibility. It's not like going to the bathroom and throwing it on people. So in this field, in this esoteric field, people in the know, of course, are aware of this. You can't prove anything. That's it. You can prove it to yourself because you are there, you are the observer, it happens, and you are very much advised to ignore anything saying that it's all in your head and blah, 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 because everything is in your head, or your body mind, as I would say. The head is just too specialized, too restricted. So everything is perceived from within. That's where awareness is. Objective things are actually a translation of whatever is there that hits the senses, which is usually some form of vibration, temperature variation, pressure variation, molecular signature. All of these things are the body-mind's way of connecting to what it deems its environment, from which it deems itself separate. This is a basic premise. It's both a philosophical premise about existence, about our existence, because it's an experience, but as an experience, it can also be built upon through esoteric understanding because it's fundamental and fundamentally tied to consciousness itself. So I would like the listener to pay attention because I don't know how, this won't be longer than a podcast, but it may also be much shorter. Depends what I feel I need to say. For the moment, I want to clarify that my primary disposition was toward transmutation of consciousness, spirituality, in other words. Yoga, alchemy, inner alchemy, not outer alchemy, but inner alchemy, meditative practices, visualizations, vibration transfer, things like that. Psychic, the paranormal, and all of these things were essentially either from a quasi-scientific point of view, which was basically what's going on, as opposed to how does it feel like it's going on. What are my senses telling me is going on exclusively? My inner senses even, if I objectify them. And then you go intuitively, what's the meaning behind this? And you notice that the mind approaches these things differently than it does exclusively the outer world. These are different domains, just like the mind has different centers for vision processing and different centers for audio processing, auditory processing. So, in the same way, the unseen world is processed completely differently than the seen world. And you can't really apply the parameters of the seen world onto the seen world without understanding what their common ground is. And since you don't know the unseen world, you have no clue what their common ground is. Unified field theories are true. It's an intuitive sense humans have that everything really is connected and it all boils down to a single thing. It's a seed effect. Everything in our world, in the biological world, is born from something. So you have something like a seed that sprouts and it grows and becomes an organism. You have a fertilized egg, turns into an organism and grows. So it seems, and time goes the same way. Our perceptions are organized that way. Everything has a beginning and then goes and unfolds from there. It can have an ending, it can be open-ended, but the beginning is there. We cannot conceive of something that is beginningless because then it has no cause. And if it doesn't have a cause, what is this driving force? So let's say it doesn't have a cause in time, but then it has something that would have been a cause that keeps it going. And it's a continuity and a continuum. So these existential questions that may be over-intellectualized for most people get into a certain they get a person into a certain awareness frame that can divorce from conventional thinking. Because that's the most important thing, to divorce from conventional thinking without going into distorted thinking or perverse thinking or sick thinking or just thinking that's taken over by a drive that does not have your best interest, so to speak, at heart, or even a heart at all. So this isn't about somebody doing magic, wanting to teach people magic, or mysticism and wanting to teach people mysticism. This is about somebody who's been having revelations and is using magic and mysticism as a way to convey them. Because just putting them into words will not convey anything. They will be sounding like New Age gobbledygook. Well, I am putting them into words, and they do sound like New Age gobbledygook sometimes. But the practice, which is based on traditions that are not New Age, the practices will confirm things, and they are not practices that will be dangerous or anything like that. In fact, they are not really step 1, step 2, step 3, if I can help it. That's a habit that's hard to break when you convey things like this, but I would rather convey things in a narrative. If you listen to it, if you get it, and you use your own imagination, and you're observant, careful, and discerning, then there's not going to be a problem, because you're just doing your thing. Nobody is basically saying, do this, do that, do the other. You intuit it and say, oh. And in doing that, you are able to keep a handle on the situation. It's not some technique that's doing anything. It's you following, and you say it's the same thing. Yeah, I'm following certain guidelines. But it isn't a specific structure. This is what I'm trying to say. This is a very subtle difference in most minds, but it's a very profound difference when you are dealing with symbologies that have a presence that affects things. It affects the human consciousness, first of all, and then human consciousness affects experience. So the only thing where the so-called life-death dynamic and all of the terrible things you see in the book of Revelations with the opening of seals and terrible calamities and monsters and horsemen and things like that, all of these things have a reality. But it is far more in our best interest to approach them from a subjective point of view than an objective one. And the point is that from an esoteric perspective, it's the same spectrum. Yes, they are intended to be approached from a subjective point of view, basically as esoteric experiences. They're symbolic allegories. At the same time, the allegories actually hit home as how intense these experiences are. For the individual, it's like the end of the world, or it can be. Because what happens is that for a certain presence of consciousness within every individual and the world at large and within matter itself, it is a matter of what the Bible calls the second death, which isn't the death of the body. That's the death that needs to be overcome. That kind of death, physical, psychic, psychological, the tearing apart of the energy body, decay, these things are the result of false spirit being present. And false spirit is essentially one that has alienated itself in order to generate individuality. Call it the refuse of an original sin of spirit that was purposeful in order to generate the impossible, something spirit would probably never, or else it would have been there already. So this had a beginning. Creation and what we are experiencing as manifestation is a specific point, and maybe, but relative to nothing, because it's the absolute beginning. It still is a specific point and center of becoming. And therein, we can see the causes in a symbolic way, in the way our psyche can digest, that affect reality. And this goes into a paradigm. The paradigm needs to be mythic, because then it will be archetypal, which means we can transfer it from level to level. We can associate it with world events, we can associate it with personal events, we can associate it with emotions, with thoughts, with stories, with society, all kinds of metaphoric dynamics, with the natural world, as long as we're careful to know that this is basically a generalized mental template that has self-similarity in existence. That's what an archetype is. It's not just about humans. A true archetype actually connects to other levels of existence independent of the human condition. However, we can only understand them in terms of the human condition because that's how they conform to us and we conform to them. We meet each other on that basis. We're not going out to meet them on some other realm. There's no need for that. We need to be ourselves here on earth, grounded. Altered states are part of that. Dreams are part of that. Meditation can be part of that. We do actually spontaneously go into altered states from children to adults. So that means that we can explore creatively the potentials of these altered states, and people have done that. It was a matter of survival for tribal cultures, for hunter-gatherers, and thus they had a human being there who was a representative of contact with the unseen world and the ability to exchange goods and services from it. So there was a reverence with nature. Everything was a matter of alliances. You didn't worship anything in terms of, oh Lord, I'm nothing and you own me. Life was sacred. And people wanted to live, not just survive. And human beings especially were capable of living in such a way that when they enjoyed themselves, the whole environment would blossom. There were some human beings that were so psychically open that their presence would create an environmental paradise field, so to speak. This also would be, shall we say, reinforced by environmental factors, mineralogy, geography, even celestial events and time periods would augment this human relationship with the environment that then became a memory of a golden age, which may have been an interim age. It may have been between like two hell ages or whatever. Golden age basically means, okay, you're not suffering overall, and basically you're living as you should, but within certain limitations that keep things golden, so to speak. So in order to be able to reach a level of greater freedom and fulfillment, certain things need to be open. Certain pathways need to be open, and those pathways would be occupied by something that needs to be transmuted. Now, transmutation is the term we use for spirit, and it's a parallel term to how the Emerald Tablet speaks of the one thing that can penetrate any physical or coarse thing or tangible thing, and it can transform any subtle, refined, or intangible thing. So just say that penetration is also viable with shaping a little bit. Let me rephrase that. Penetration basically means that the physical doesn't inhibit its presence. Transformation means that it can affect anything that is non-corporeal. Energies, the psyche, the mind, anything subjective. So this one thing is essentially your consciousness, and the consciousness itself undergoes a cooking or a fermentation from its own nature. We are guiding our own nature, the energy part, the sensate part, everything with which we experience the world, we turn it essentially toward consciousness. And consciousness is the one perceiving it, all of this. So it creates a kind of infinite mirror effect through meditative states where the consciousness essentially reaches a point where it is free of anything other than itself. However, if that point turns it into an indifferent, cold, dead consciousness, then it is not the right one, obviously. Which means that somebody realizes they're a psychopath, or maybe any kind of loving instinct is exactly an instinct. It is part of their tangible nature. It is the body mind, as whatever materials would say, yeah, that's caused by evolution or whatever. Oh, we're emotional mammals, etc. However, the spirit is supposed to drive that with its unconditional love. So we're supposed to be sources of unconditional love that we radiate into the world because our cups overflow with it. We can't help it. We feel too good. And this isn't the type of good feeling that's going to get you eaten by predators. This is the type of good feeling that's going to turn predators into your friends because you're not part of the food chain anymore. You've transcended it. That's why all of this is associated with changes in diet that essentially amount to minimal interference with the biosphere. Now, I disagree to a certain point. There can be changes in diet, and minimal interference may involve a whole other dietary dynamic. Fungi, for example. But who knows? Because pure breatharianism means that there is absolutely no wear and tear on the physical body. And that would mean that your subtle body needs to maintain a coherent structure to bring it back to an ideal state where there is no wear and tear. And how connected to a world where there is wear and tear would you be then? Where would that transition go? So it is about a certain adaptation, and there is a certain relativity to it because we are one with our environment. We are the center of awareness of our environment. So we're like synapses and neurons, or basically the internals of consciousness itself. We are points of emergence of awareness that is meant to be the original source dynamic of existence. This is the basis of everything. I mean, perhaps our creation has been somewhere in the middle. It's almost like somebody like, okay, let's get all these things together, we'll structure this, and then when it's ready, we'll call on all of reality to inhabit it. And reality is basically makes a copy of itself and puts itself inside there. And a copy is not something material. So it is a child of itself. It is its own self emerging, because the self can emerge anywhere. It doesn't have an image and a likeness. There are no many selves. There is only one consciousness. What you see from your eyes and what you hear, essentially the awareness behind it, not the frequencies of it, not the way it modulates, not its expression, even not the feeling, but the principle, the awareness itself, the state that I am, is universal. It's omniversal. And it is only part of the equation, because the other side that gives you an experience of this I am, that makes it real and tangible, where it actually comes full circle and it's a complete thisness, a complete essence of being, then you can speak about the true source, which when experience comes, the only word you can use is love. And ultimate love, meaning everything, the perfect state. And this perfect state isn't monotonous. It transcends that. It transcends the ideas of what monotony is and what polyphony is and what a relationship is. It transcends anything you can conceive of what you might call being alone or being with many. There is a certain experience that some people have on psychedelic chemicals, which is natural or not, which essentially amounts to consciousness opening up so much, but not opening up the source. You open up your consciousness so much that you are an impartial observer, the only one within everything, coming out of everything, but without any sense of anything. You're alone. And that is not the state of source. That is a state of self-alienation, where unfortunately those states of awareness can make you focus on one little part of you that happens to be the one that's really crying for help the most in some ways, where you perceive your individuality. You are experiencing that state that in Christian myth would be the state of Lucifer before the pride set in. Basically a certain depression that, I'm cut off from everything, and here I am, and but I'm so great because I'm trying to experience everything. The thing is that individuality is incomplete. This is just the beginning. This is where you take a branch off the tree and replant it into the ground, hoping it's going to grow new roots. And so the nourishment of the ground is meant to come and reforge through experience a consciousness that is purely made for that state. And the only consciousness that is purely made for that state is the one that originally conceived it. It is the consciousness of source. And why aren't we speaking about the nature of source or source itself? Because all of that is innocent. We're going to the causality. And so the causality of everything comes to consciousness. If you have the right consciousness, then everything else will change. The issue is that we do not. We are partially the so-called right consciousness to varying degrees. Where the right consciousness is lacking more than it should be, you might say we have states of observable psychopathy, states where individuals cannot help but fall into expressions known as deadly sins, extremes of unbalanced, unhealthy psychological expression of human behavior. And that's just a generalization. But there is hatred roots into the individual, and the psyche becomes the opposite of, not even the opposite, the contradiction of what a source-infused individual should be, which means that you have a kind of anti-source. And an anti-source is not the opposite that can balance with source. It is the contradiction of it. It needs to be undone. So this whole zone, the cause of it is a certain act that had to be instigated, a beginning. But the beginning that would be separate from source, because source on its own would unify everything. You can't structure something from scratch in a certain way where it responds in extreme paradox constantly. The image and likeness of the whole, because once you have a creation, then it's the creation's image. This is a body thing. It's the creation's job to go back into itself and create little likenesses in its image and likeness. And through that, spirit comes in and works. However, for even that to be possible, individuality of consciousness needs to be a thing. And when this is in a state that is not allowed to express freely, when there is no loving connection to source, which is loving connection, everything falls apart because it's meaningless. And that is the big lesson, so to speak. Now, the lesson has created mutations in existence that need to be undone. These are like wrinkles that need to be smoothed out. This isn't going about legitimate entities and undoing them. Nothing is undone that is real or true. What is undone is an action that passes off as an entity. So it's a perpetual action, a sustained action that feeds off of existence until existence is done. So it's like a destructive motor or a robot or an artificial drive that is essentially essentially what spirit becomes without source, without heart, without love. So in this esoteric exploration with Jay and on the other media, I'm getting a YouTube thing going there where there's just 10-minute exposés of this kind of thing, called the Esoteric Survivalist. And there's also the Substack link, which is acgeorge.substack.com. And I go through what all these implications are because this is affecting our world today. The only way you perceive it is clearly if you have an imagination that can work with patterns and allegories. So a mythic way. That's probably the sanest way to perceive it. To take things too literally and deal with them directly before you've opened up your own inspiration and awareness to be able to get the so-called information that is love-based. And of course, everybody will make mistakes as they move through because I'm not teaching a method. This is going to happen anyways because this is affecting the collective. This is a revelation I'm sharing. And revelations are either true or not, but they're rarely factual in any immediate sense. What they are essentially is a pattern that will affect events and that will become causal unless it is altered or unless we participate with it. And then this is within an even greater pattern where there is a purpose to all of this, where this is actually a natural flow. The pattern, however, is difficult to discern. So creating discernment, the challenge is that you can't really speak freely unless you say things, unless you express paradigms that are really go against esoteric development and evolution. So our consciousness is not pure. Every spiritual tradition will essentially tell you that. And there is consciousness that is parasitic. Now, this is not our nature. This isn't the energy part. This isn't. So when you associate the underworld with evil, the only reason that is the case is because something fell into it. So what we are talking about is fallen consciousness, fallen spirit. And that, again, is an allegory. So we will speak mythically. We will speak New Ageishly. And we will speak in terms of traditions that are credited. Western magic, Eastern magic, Southern magic, Northern magic, whatever we can get our hands on, that makes sense to us and which can be adapted into this kind of paradigm. Now, this paradigm is not dogmatic. It's very basic. So look through whatever myths and traditions, and you will see the nuclear family paradigm in there. All gods of the Bronze Age and afterwards are connected to some kind of family structure. They're related to each other in some way. That way you have creation, and creation is looked at reproductively. It's not looked at the architect is making something. That metaphor came with urban civilization. The metaphors before were all organic because that's who we are. The world is organic. When you're sitting naked in nature, you do not think of architects building things. Whether you're cold, hot, or whatever, you are actually adapted, or else you wouldn't be there. Now, if you've strayed from nature and you've learned artificial ways and you are addicted to them now, because that's what happens when we are exposed to toxins, the body needs to learn to live with them, so it thinks, so it creates changes that then become painful because you become dependent on this thing. You don't need it, but you have to live with it because it's there and it's either going to kill you or you got to learn a certain form of dependency. And that's what happens with anything that is what we might call negative awareness. When I say negative awareness, I really don't mean a minus sign in front of awareness. I mean an awareness that negates, that diminishes, that contradicts anything that is positive or affirming or, sustaining, sustainable, sustaining, desired, meaningful, anything. Such as aesthetically pleasing something, it wants to make it ugly. Something is uplifting, it wants to slam it down. Something is hopeful, it wants to remove that hope and dash it. It is always a raining on the parade of true, joyful, loving consciousness. And this isn't that blaming it. Oh yeah, because it's not a cry for help. This is the fallacy. The cry for help comes from nature. The cry for help comes from what this possesses. So one of the challenges of esoteric cultivation in our day, where we are dealing with a certain kind of apocalyptic template, a space-time template, you might say, in our evolution, what we may call a tribulation, which means a friction of sorts, unpleasantness, challengeness, or a challenge that is there because of an original intention that spans existence beyond comprehension, unless you want to conceptualize it and oversimplify it, which we do. So, I am explaining the paradigm. It always comes back to that. I'm not explaining techniques. The paradigm is the myth. Now, the myth is kind of universal or a common thread. Follow it throughout cultures, follow it throughout historic periods, follow it into prehistory. Extend it into the celestial realm, extend it into the underworld realm, the chthonic realm as they call it. Extend it into the five senses, into biology. It is there, it permeates. And details on certain things are unnecessary. We open up to revelations on a need-to-know basis where we can have a loving response and not a misunderstood one. Unless there is hatred involved, unless we are speaking of parasitic spirit. Now, parasitic spirit, again, when we say the enemy, we tend to think in terms of a possessed person, which means war, conflict, revenge, justice, in terms of punishment, rewards and punishments. All of these things are our nature's response to the compromise of unloving spirit. which needed to be infused in us in order for us to become individuals. The body-mind grew around the initial infusion of unloving spirit through its survival impulse and everything in order to maintain coherence in spite of the presence of loving source all around it, until loving source could actually come back from within it. Now, what is this? This is like, so nature is suffering with this presence of unloving spirit. What kind of thing is that? First of all, this was a desire of nature, not to suffer, but to become coherent, a coherent nature of an individual, and realizing what that means. And it is a wonderful thing. And no nature, no yin, no divine feminine would ever backtrack. The body itself, the spirit of manifestation, of that manifesting dynamic, is also the spirit of loving creation and the spirit of relationship, the specifics of relationship, through which source flows. And source is meant to infuse the body-mind directly. The body-mind has its own spirit that it needs then to transmute. We are not talking about kicking out the bad guys and throwing them into hell. We're talking about transmuting them. It's what they call the second death. The lake of fire that is expressed in the apocalypse of John the Apostle is essentially us. It's in us. It is part of us. It is not some cosmic other dimensional thing. Although, the macrocosm and the microcosm have analogous dynamics. So what we perceive as evil in the world will be transformed in a similar fashion. However, we do not want, this isn't some destructive thing. If the metaphor becomes literal, we're in trouble. And this is what, and I don't mean, it's the end of everything. I mean that it's going to be a tribulation, physical. We can't avoid this. Nature, in fact, is innocent. However, this loveless spirit is embedded in nature and has been from the beginning, because individuality could never be a thing in the biosphere, especially. And all the spirits that are quasi-individualized on Earth and all the gods that are quasi-individualized from the celestial realm, this is due to what's going on here. It may be going on in other realms. It's definitely going on in other planes. But the actual root of it, where it's sustainable, where we are actually going to, we're not going to get denser than this. We're actually fine-tuning the density into a zone where, are we coherent enough that we can move into higher dimensions physically? What does that mean? That means turning the physical world into one that is omnimorphic, which is capable of that kind of thing. Where you look at a table and you can turn it into a cloud or whatever, but the table is a thing. It has to have consciousness then everything's going to be a living entity. So this is, sometimes changes are too drastic. Sometimes they're not desired. These reality dynamics, they don't replace existing reality. They build upon it. So if existing reality is unfulfilled, it will draw from that and fine-tune itself. So reality grows, and there's infinite potential for growth. And that's because of something called nothingness, or the void. The void is just, I'm doing my individuality project and the creation and possibility that comes from that. How's that going to work then? Well, I need infinite space. How much space do you need? No quantities. Don't restrict me like that. I need infinite space, and I want it now. And I want to experience that I can expand as much as possible through all possibility without ever being cramped. And so be it. Of course. That's the whole point of infinity. Infinity isn't, it goes endless and then what happens, Forget about the then what happens. You are the what happens. You are the happening, the happener, and the what happens. So that is the perspective, and you don't have to lose the so-called individual self. You can journey through the world that is as much its own perfection as you are your own perfection, in a relationship that reveals that you are the same essence without anything turning monotonous. This is actually an impelling force toward greater fulfillment. However you choose to define that, as long as it is not false, contradictory, Like dying. Nobody wants to die. It's not death as a transition. If I want to be something different, make a change. Nobody wants to undergo the process of being torn apart and dismantled and disintegrated, so to speak, fragmented, forced into a frame of existence that is contrary to nature, to desire, to what one is. So suffering. Nobody wants suffering. Nothing wants suffering. So when I say in the podcast with Jay about everybody wants to have a good time, everything wants to have a good time, it is not the same conception of party time that a decadent human would have. Everything needs to be fulfilled continuously as an ongoing process that then has a gradient that is satisfactory, a gradient of increase and modulation that is a composition that is itself fulfilling. And that has further creative openings and things, and everything is interactive. So it's a wonderful thing. That's all I can say. Reality, existence, as it could be and should be and is in its nature, is a wonderful thing. And we are making it wonderful through fulfilling an organic dynamic of becoming, where the individual is exactly natural and perfect, so to speak, and everything they've gone through, including contradiction, including the paradoxes, including things, the whole idea of suffering that has been damaging, and then healed from that, everything they've gone through forges their individuality, which is now incontrovertible in existence because it has even gone through the realm of disconnection from source. I mean, individuality has transcended source and realized that it's not a good thing. But it still has done it. And it's done it because it stands apart from source because of that. Our suffering is what makes us apart from source. And on the one hand, that is a sad thing. On the other hand, it is a glorious thing because we are building source on a completely new foundation. But it's over, and it has been for eons. Suffering has been over. The so-called need for suffering was a split-second point of alignment between a loveless spirit and human possibility in nature, where nature says, I get it, okay, give me the love now because I can't take this anymore. And then it doesn't, because this spirit goes, no, I'm staying. And I'm destroying all of this because I'm the contradiction now, because I'm not about source. I'm crazy and I hate you all and rock and, and so all hell breaks loose literally. And that is the essence of it. So a myth of the generation of the problem of suffering in the world. It's not about blaming someone because, again, that is the problem talking. We need to understand the situation minus the problem. What is the situation by credible sources of experience within us that is not actually the hatred talking and pulling another sneak attack or another deception in order to lead us into the contradiction, destruction, and annihilation of what should be loved and what should be cherished and what should be valued. So when source is gone, the gold is gone. And when source is gone, an individual, to the degree that source is gone, would be greedy. And that individual then would try to reinforce the biology of, well, I don't have source, so I need nourishment, gluttony. Oh, source is gone, and I want to create, and I want to feel good, and lust. So these three guys are direct, all of the deadly sins, because there's 7, and it forms a spectrum that is very easy to identify and thus work with archetypally. And this is a new thing for me. I want to work with not the sins themselves as a so-called left-hand, dark, whatever. I'm doing the opposite. And I'm not creating virtues either. I want to see where in the ethers the 7 deadly sins are rooted. And then to replace them with the virtues. And because the virtues are useless unless they replace the sins. That is the one thing that is being replaced. You are replacing it right where it's being rooted in your nature. So just changing the pattern, changing the spirit, changing the consciousness is not going to work. Transmutation means going into the existing thing and rearranging and reconstituting it from scratch, which means that it retains its memories. Those are in nature. Spirit retains its memories because it has given them to the yin aspect, the imprints. What is imprinted? It's the medium. That's where suffering comes in. I mean, hatred has imprinted. And then the rest of existence should be to heal nature that has been suffering in this way by the imprint of hatred. So hatred being removed again, it cannot be removed unless the imprint is healed as the removal happens. And so this happens little by little. And progress is very, very slow, in other words. However, Jay and I have discussed that, well, when you use techniques of magic and shaping to stabilize your environment, in a way a yogi does, for example, with mantras. The yogi goes, well, I know where to apply this mantra. So if there are those who are causing harm, I know that I can apply this without creating more imprints of suffering onto nature. If there is a need for a loving relationship and something hateful interferes, I know how to apply, because I understand, and thus I am wise in the application of a force that can reshape the situation to guarantee nature will not be traumatized. And when I say nature, I don't just mean the birds, the bees, and the trees. I mean organic nature. I mean the substance, not just material, the fields and forces. Interestingly, science, which is so divorced from nature, actually is tuned into measuring nature as an objective thing. So anything the material world, but not the mathematics of it, not the ideas of it, not the dogmas or the ideals or the philosophies surrounding nature. I'm talking about the five sense experience of nature, as well as extended senses of clairvoyance, audience, etc., etc. Intuition, the intuitive senses, so to speak. So Jay and I are talking about shall we say, confronting the challenges that everybody faces in the world without the need to make the world stranger than it is. That is the value of esoteric solution. Esoteric solution is not the same as a psychological solution, which is programming yourself or reprogramming yourself, even deprogramming yourself. That is a mystical path and is necessary to a great degree. What matters, however, is all of this is making space for a new consciousness that can carry source. This consciousness not only carries source enough, it has a heart, okay, and it is your heart. So the spirit that comes in carries your heart and soul with it, and your heart and soul is a product of all of your experience, including your suffering. So you don't throw your suffering out the window in the memories. They're not painful anymore. In fact, they're inspiring in a way. They're empowering. I went through this. I stood. I am. And my desires are valid when I am loving. But when I have a hateful monster inside of me, a hateful monster, literally, the word monster means creation. And spirit that did this to itself agreed to become a monster. This was the real sacrifice. Lucifer is the lamb. Okay? Christ, Lucifer, the mystery of the name of Jesus of Nazareth, that in Greek comes out to 666. And a certain interpretation of the book of Revelation that says that the Antichrist is Jesus of Nazareth, worshipped as a god. So Christianity is really anti-Christianity. However, Christ consciousness is something else. The difference between the Judaic viewpoint, aside from chosen people and stuff, but the archetypal difference, and even the chosen people is an archetype. It can be universalized, but Judaism doesn't view it that way. Christianity, that would be true Christianity, would basically universalize the divine chosen essence, the chosen people status, into all of humanity. And this chosen people means a responsible people, people who can respond to the divine awareness. When they respond to the divine awareness, they exhibit Christ consciousness. That is their true spirit. Christ consciousness carries the heart. It is like pure consciousness with a golden center. And that golden center allows it individuation. That golden center, however, does not have a body. So it isn't really, it's an individuating dynamic that requires to be one with our nature, because our nature holds all of the experience. The Akashic memories are not just lost in a field out there. They're always a Planck constant away, or a Planck length away, because 10 to the minus 33 meters away, because they're right there. It's us. Our nature is holographic, so we are not looking. The Akashic records are our own energy body is the Akashic records. It holds everything, and it is limitless and endless and interpenetrates with everything else. So we don't have to limit it that way, but we can create a sphere of experience. That is what we are talking about when we speak of the Merkaba body. It is called a chariot in Judaic mysticism. It is a vortex in New Age mysticism, and according to certain channelings and stuff. It is the light body in its perfected form, where it actually crystallizes. And when I say crystallizes, I mean it realizes its golden spiritual essence, where it says, okay, this is the ideal vibration for nature. And it's modulated, but it's always like in a way that nature loves perfectly. So this is the ideal, the diamond body that cannot be corrupted by anything else. It can meet all of these disjointed, demonic, alienated spirits, and it will transmute them instantly. The human being incarnated in fully awakened will transform and can transform anything and everything, and it also can transmute any and any all in any consciousness, because it becomes one with the source. That is not an overwhelming experience. Because we have transcended source, we have a built-in, our nature has learned a built-in dynamic where it can up the volume, lower the volume, increase any frequency, decrease any frequency of the spectrum in order to open up the portal of experience of our choice. This is not something you can teach to the mind as it stands. Consciousness has to be transmuted. So the people who should be actually practicing magic the most are the ones who are the most devout and sincere and loving, and have a faith that is not burdened by the stupid stuff. Limitations of hatred projected and unresolved forgiveness and stuff like that. But anyways, these are the people that feel guilty or convinced they shouldn't practice, or they shouldn't, explore this, because it is corrupting. Excuse me. It is corrupting. And it's not only, but it's corrupting when you don't have a faith and when you don't have a connection to your higher self. Hebrew mysticism actually bridges the gap. I mean, of course, there's all of these things that you shouldn't be doing, like pronouncing the Lord's name, and you should be 40 years old, and you should be a man and have a long beard, and a whole bunch of other stuff in order to be capable of looking into the mystical essence, which I disagree with, of course. Of course I disagree with it. I'd be a real bastard if I didn't, in this day and age especially. I do agree, though, that this kind of thing is for adults. And I mean, taking it seriously is for adults. Anybody under 21, not even 18, 18 to 21 is kind of a discovery period for me, if you're going to get into this. You can role play all you want, knowing it's a role play. You can use your imagination, because that is a form of shaping. But formalizing it as in a kind of initiation, which does not have to be a ritual. All it has to be is your own agreement. It's a sincere thing. And a lot of people do it when they're teenagers, if they're getting into stuff like this. The problem is, it's easy to be deceived when you're a teenager. And you don't learn that until much later. So you make your mistakes. But at least learn not to blame the messenger for the message. And I don't mean myself, I mean the magic itself. Magic is not meant to be done by anyone other than a mature adult, a biologically mature adult, who has had enough life experience that they can actually slap two brain cells together and have common sense and understand that magic is not to be done on its own. It is a loan from nature before it starts stressing the body. And that loan is meant to bring you to a position where events are favorable for you to actually cultivate. And I don't mean joining a monastery and doing anything extreme. I mean taking the transmutation of your consciousness serious. I mean recognizing, opening your intuition and recognizing where programming is in you and in others, and knowing that how and when to impose is more than likely a decision that you can only make later rather than sooner. Because the more, you see, the paradox is, the more of a psychopath you are, this is all irrelevant, to a psychopath. They'll just do it. So my responsibility is to not convey information haphazardly. Other people conceal information, they put blinds on it or distort information, even create misinformation. Often misinformation is propagated, and it's even dangerous than doing it the right way. It's even worse than doing it the right way. So that's really not responsible, in my opinion. But what a magus who is creative and not just a passive regurgitator of some tradition, what this person can do is essentially calibrate the magical system, calibrate the connection with the archetypes in such a way that it can't be abused. If you abuse it, it won't work for you. But what does that mean? Well, you have to know exactly what abuse is. And abuse is unloving consciousness. And what unloving consciousness is unhealthy consciousness. We're not talking about somebody emotionally loving, gushing all the time, or feeling well all the time. You are honest. The sure sign of love is self-honesty without judgment, knowing that, okay, I'm going through this. And if it's creating, and I feel distress that it's generating suffering for me and maybe for others, and so I'm going to modulate it as best I can. You're good to yourself, but you're also not going to throw your relationships in the lurch. However, you are not going to compromise yourself for your relationships up until the point where you are open to your true self enough. You see, the transmutation of consciousness is not painful because there is no nature isn't going to suffer. When you are impatient with yourself or allow the parasitic consciousness to have the upper hand, it will cause your cultivation efforts to go awry and then blame you for it. Blame the cultivation for it. When it's actually the unresolved hatred. And the only way to resolve hatred is to release it. It can't be resolved. You can't negotiate with it. You can't pacify it. It doesn't get pacified. It's not like rage. So there is a reinterpretation of the 7 deadly sins, which I will take down to a more condensed archetypal level and basically do something similar to what Zoroastrianism does, because it also has its own, sins, and these are actually demons. Asmodeus was supposed to be the demon of wrath. But Asmodeus is also a jinn. In other words, you can take the demon of wrath and actually, to a certain degree, transmute the consciousness of that demon, and you can't fully redeem it, though, because it's so tied into human karma. And that way, Asmodeus cannot be redeemed until the redemption of the human. Then the false Asmodeus will go. And what Asmodeus represents will actually become a real sustainable thing. And that will be working symbiotically with humanity. But you won't have, oh, hello, Asmodeus. I don't know. Some people might. But it doesn't matter. That's creative. Your creative paranormal perceptions can be part of your reality constructively. Now, all of this is organic, as I'm constantly saying. It is not promoting, and even though you can construe it that way, it's not the way I would prefer. So there is no ism here. I'm going around taking the esoteric distillation in a way that a modern Western mind, and most minds on the globe are coherent with the modern Western mind, whether they know it or not, just like so many people have smartphones these days. So the modern Western civilization cultural template is part of all the others. So you can kind of universalize the archetypes. Carl Jung, in this case, should be making an exception in that, well, anybody can get into the Western way of thinking as long as they don't abandon their original and create a kind of modern fusion, which I see in a lot of anime and a lot of contemporary youth-oriented artistic expressions, shall we say. That isn't decadent. And so there is a way to understand the archetypes, because before any real occult or magical work is done, separately from the mystical stuff, because you can engage in meditation and whatever, as long as you don't get caught up in the ideology, then you'll probably maintain a healthy stance with it. I know it's always been uncool to be talking about love and stuff unless you're a hippie type or fit into certain social categories of behavior. But it is actually very cool because you're genuine. A kid doesn't even have to say it. They can be embarrassed about it because adults are all screwed up. But a kid is really loving with nature. Ideally, if a kid hates nature and starts torturing animals, you know that something bad is there, a bad spirit. And you don't beat the bad spirit out physically. You don't punish the nature for the sins of the spirit. This is what we've been doing. This is what the so-called devil, the twisting, the corrupter, the contradiction has been driving us to do. And then blame that and exile it. No, you're not blaming it. You're bringing in something that the universe is ready and we're ready to accept, evolutionarily speaking, that will energize the demonic spirit so much that it will actually transform from within and the soul will come out. Part of the repentance is what you might call a symptom of that. Now, I am not an esoteric Christian. I do believe I am applying some of the principles. I'm not a tantric. I'm applying some of the principles. I'm not really a yogi. Again, I studied and applied what I can and how it comes together. Now, how do you know how to do that? Well, it ain't easy. You have to be willing to not suffer the consequences, but to accept the consequences until you realize that you don't need to be suffering anything as long as you're not causing the suffering. And sometimes you may need to defend yourself. That's what part of this is. That's why I talk about the esoteric survivalism. It's basically the hardships of the world that are messing with our heads and are messing with our hearts need to be met with an ability to brave those hardships without having to suffer for them. And this is my ambition. This is my wish, and why I'm really making these podcasts. So in a way, yes, there is going to be some instruction and teaching, but again, this is going to be spontaneous, because if it has to become work, then I got to monetize, and if I can monetize without it becoming work, that would be great for everyone, meaning that nobody has to pay anything. But if over time people want more, there's a collection of those who say, yeah, I'm interested in whatever, then we can work something out. But for now, we're just going to keep it to the revelation phase. And I really honor Jay's contribution. And now that this introductory phase, you see we had technical difficulties, and his I couldn't download the thing again. If I get it, that's cool. Maybe. But this gave me an opportunity to be able to kind of set the record straight with where I'm coming from. And I don't want to keep going round and round with it. So what I will do is refer this podcast as the interim Magus Talk podcast, because this is a Magus monologue. And hopefully it can actually bring some insight into all of the rest of the stuff. So I will refer to it and say, look, you want to hear a monologue about what this is about and why it's being talked about and what is going to be shared. So when occultism is shared, in a case where it's very, very specific, I will know that it will only be given to people who can responsibly apply it, because it won't work otherwise. There are yogis that can actually tune mantras to, unless you have a specific counter code or other reach a certain state of awareness, they'll work for you like at 10%, or they'll work for you at 20%. But you won't be able to do any big things with them because you would abuse it. And in fact, too much energy would probably be bad for you. But if you reach a state of sustainability, such mantras can actually open up. You would have revelations with them that are not the revelations a common human being has. So in this way, the Gayatri mantra, for example, can be used by anybody, mostly by Hindus because they got the pronunciation right and the culture is aligned with it. But I don't believe that it hasn't caused me problems, that's for sure. It's the most sacred prayer I could make that's formalized, in my honest opinion. Blows the Lord's Prayer out of the water. In any case, however, it is still compromised to a degree that there is resistance to the vibration. And if that vibration would come through as it used to come through in the Bronze Age for some yogis, people would have their caps blown off. And it would stress the body-mind too much. The body-mind is not prepared for that kind of intensity with its purity. And even those that could channel it would be ungrounded. So they would basically be in some lost bridge, and some people do. They get the full revelation, but then they lose touch with the deeper levels, especially the underworld, which they end up calling hells when they translate it in English. So all of this is par for the course. There ain't going to be any magic that can be abused, but there won't be any details given that, unless those who have ears to hear can glean it. There will be details given, and they will be details of principle. So the first thing we're going to do in these podcasts, and in the esoteric survivalist, and with the way the Substack philosophical Magus articles are going, the installments, is give the essence of the situation. Is you got to get your mind straight. You're working from two angles. You're burning the candle at both ends. From consciousness, the highest end, so to speak, which if you just do that angle, you're going to either lose your grounding or end up with some aberration that is not compatible with you. It's very difficult. You need to create an alignment where you're actually kind of triangulating. But before the triangulation, you need to be able to say, okay, here's the macrocosm, or here's the far end, the source, the abstract, the faith, the spirit part. And this is my nature. This is the body, mind. This is the part, my psychology. This is the essence. This is where I feel energy. This is where the underworld works. And all of these zones that can also be very scary, and where the emotions have their play. And this realm is sacred. And in order to refrain from hurting that realm, you open up to awaken the inner spirit and the moderating spirit and whatever soul you may have. And in fact, let me say this, that the most painful parts of the psyche are those where the soul is meant to grow directly. They're the parts where something is missing that needs to be there, that seems like it's been torn away. And the deeper you go, that's where the dark night of the soul is. And many people, they do not resolve the dark night of the soul. They step away from it. They had enough. They resolve as much as they can and realize that, things are much better now, but you've only scratched the surface. The point is that the nature needs to be conscious enough with sincere, true spirit that's on its side, and so you protect yourself from there. Because when spirit is bonded with nature, as it is in this world, and it's not good spirit, it has power. And most of the time, hate cannot make nature do anything. It has to kill it first or make it unconscious, knock it out, and then puppet its corpse. This is why the laws of physics seem so contrived in some way, so primitive, so unconscious. It's because there isn't a bonding allowed. It's like you want to get together with your lover, And there's always some idiot in the middle that nobody wants, but has now claimed your lover, and she's half dead by now. And I'm speaking from a male point of view because the spirit, the yang aspect, is active, and so the archetype is more male. You don't have female devils, really. Succubi are not devils. It's a whole other thing. They're energy beings. There is evil spirit in there that is pretending to be female because spirit is genderless, basically. In relation to nature, it is male, but in itself, it doesn't conceive of such things. Especially when it's alienated. When it's connected, it's I am, really, and happy for it, and proud of itself, without engaging in this false dynamic called the deadly sin, which is really not true pride. True pride is self-value. True envy, or the actual genuine emotion that became envy, is honoring the value of others or the environment or anything that's beyond you. So honoring yourself and honoring your environment. That means honoring all your relationships. And then you have another spectrum of wrath, which is really hot hatred, and sloth, which is really indifference, which is cold hatred. I don't care. And so I go my own way, seemingly, but I'm really, supporting your demise in some way. The cold, indifferent scientist that is actually destroying nature by giving people with the power to destroy nature the knowledge to do so. So one of the reasons I withdrew from the whole science thing. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm giving the vector of where this is going, and with Jay in the shall we say the podcast? Yes, those the real podcast. It's a dialogue, or should be. So I'm not going to go off on these tangents, and I'm expressing all of this right now in one fell swoop. But we will be getting into the nuances of what Jay's progress is. Because right now, he's working through something important. In his case, since everybody is different, consciousness was not the strong point. So actually having him meditate and do whatever would not generate a harmonious result. Because Jay is more identified, his true consciousness is in the body at the level of the navel, and in the heart, and in the mind, but the level of the navel has a level of, the body trusts it. So his intuitive consciousness is actually connected to body sensate dynamics, and that's why Tai Chi works so well. And the body expression awakened an intuitive intelligence in him that actually could channel templates of motion, of kinesthetic revelation, shall we say. These things happen. And then he had a kind of Kundalini crisis because the awareness of actually opening up in a natural way was lacking. And we went through a lot of things, and the genies helped. They were catalysts of saying, okay, look, there's a part of yourself that's missing. This dynamic will help you attain it, this dynamic. And, well, that dynamic has too much. I don't need all that. Well, you take what you need, and the rest of it is obviously released. It doesn't matter. I mean, whatever interests you from something that really clicks. So we would go into all of these interactions and the karmic events that happened, and he could not deny that the coincidences cannot happen like this. He could not deny that this is way beyond just any coincidence. He could also not deny that there was a progression of his internal healing and karmic resolution where, like he said, he made reconciled with his father, and relationships with women became much clearer. He was able to break off from a destructive connection in other ways, etc., etc. Things that he recognized was, I couldn't do this otherwise. There was no way. I'd be off in self-destruction. I wouldn't see it. I would be blind. Yes, because the mind, the part of your spirit that is golden, the true spirit, is mainly focused around the lower elixir field, the lower brain. It doesn't make it worse or better or whatever. Everybody has a specialization where their true consciousness can congregate. Okay, look, there's true consciousness, and it's managed to retain a level of experience that has individuated it. But it's locked in a whole bunch of other spirit dynamics that are driving psychological states and events in the life of the person. Some of this is reflected in the astrological chart, which imprints the environment the way the individual comes into being. From their emergence into physical life, the environment has a certain vibratory representation of it, and that's the one the individual imprints on and applies from then on. One can be free of this when one opens to their genuine spirit. It is still part of your individuality, however. The lifetime you have where you actually awaken as a soul is the one that is going to, where your personality is basically going to draw from the most. However, that soul is not going to become more quote-unquote spiritual and a sage and whatever the stereotype is. It's actually going to draw from all of his lifetimes and all the lifetimes of everybody to say, okay, here's the stuff that I don't need to suffer for and that I can actually make as part of me, because nature will vibrate that way. There is no taking of anything. You only take when you confine nature in a way that she doesn't want to be confined. And I speak nature as the field of substantiality that gives consciousness its experiences, that it values so much. But consciousness and nature are really not separate. In body-mind, they are a single organism. So you don't transcend body-mind ever. You don't want to. All you do is transmute the consciousness of it so it can be what it originally wanted to be, what you originally wanted to be. And when you transmute spirit, you don't change. You literally do undergo a deletion of a previous drive and a recalibration of yourself, where you actually recognize your individuality. It is incontrovertible because you value it. That's why we retain it. This is what could have saved us a crap load of suffering, because we don't value our individuality enough. We try to keep it surviving because we're afraid we're going to lose it, but we really don't, because the spirit is not the real one. The real spirit values this individuality and with a sense of well-being of, yeah, isn't it cool to be me? And it's not selfish, because you're not lying to yourself. And you don't demand accolades. You're just glad to be you. That's very nice. Then you can go about the business of relating to everything in a cool way and having a good time. A great time. A creatively great time. Don't even think about constructive or destructive. Because if you lack the true spirit, this talk is like not for you, obviously. If the true spirit is there in some way and it needs to come out, then stay tuned. It needs to come out, and it needs to basically reclaim its heritage, which is the body-mind. You are not only exorcising the demons of yourself, and in doing so, you are exorcising the demons of the world to a certain extent. You are also inviting the angels of yourself that are the true sacred ones. And these angels are not going to take over. They are basically the spirit side of your nature. And your nature defines it. Your true nature. The nature that's twisted and suffering doesn't. So it's not just a pleasure principle. It's a value principle. So I'm going to leave this unedited. Just leave it as is. And I'm going to publish it as is. And I hope you've stayed with me till the end. It's about the same length as a normal podcast. And I hope it wasn't incoherent. Sometimes I go straight because this is a revelation and it's accumulated, and I haven't shared the revelation, and it's been not the kind that you have in a flash and goes away. It's a constant opening. And I've used occult exploration and archetypal exploration and many explorations, including scientific and mystical exploration, in order to make sense of the revelation and also to nourish it. And to keep triggering it, because it's not like, well, my whole life it's been trying to get through this kind of, it's almost like you're trying to tell yourself something. And I'm seeing it a lot clearer, but I know it's very important not to allow for misunderstandings, because it's not a freaky thing. This is something where you can take a step back from the presentation that you can't trust anymore in the world, which is any kind of media, any kind of electronic presentation, and including what I'm saying. And to be able to say, okay, at least what I'm saying encourages you to take a step back and purely see how it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense and there is a little bit of spirit in you, it will be triggered to explore something deeper, even if you don't look at these again. It is not just my hope, it is the nature of what is being conveyed, as I understand it. So, with that, I will leave you for today. And I hope you tune in next week. I will schedule this for Tuesday, but I hope you tune in next week for Magus Talk. This has been an interim Magus Talk episode with me, AC George, real name Aristomenes, or Ari. And I guess I'll see you next Sunday, or I hope you listen to us next Sunday, where Jay will be here, and he will have much more to say, if I can help it. So, Resident Magus, signing off. Take care.